The Cobbler Astrologer. Part 1, Arabic Folk Tale. In the great city of Isfahan lived Ahmed the Cobbler, an honest and industrious man, whose wish was to pass through life quietly, and he might have done so, had he not married a handsome wife, who, although she had condescended to accept of him as a husband, was far from being contented with his humble sphere of life. Sit-Ra, such was the name of Ahmed's wife, was ever forming foolish schemes of riches and grandeur, and though Ahmed never encouraged them, he was too fond a husband to quarrel with what gave her pleasure. An incredulous smile or a shake of the head was his only answer to her often told daydreams, and she continued to persuade herself that she was certainly destined to great fortune. It happened one evening, while in this temper of mind, that she went to the hammam, where she saw a lady retiring dressed in a magnificent robe, covered with jewels, and surrounded by slaves. This was the very condition Sit-Ra had always longed for, and she eagerly inquired the name of the happy person who had so many attendants and such fine jewels. She learned it was the wife of the chief astrologer to the king. With this information she returned home. Her husband met her at the door, but was received with a frown, nor could all his caresses obtain a smile or a word. For several hours she continued silent, and in apparent misery. At length she said, "Cease your caresses, unless you are ready to give me a proof that you do really and sincerely love me." "What proof of love," exclaimed poor Ahmed, "can you desire which I will not give? Give over cobbling, it is a vile, low trade, and never yields more than 10 or 12 dinars a day. Turn astrologer, your fortune will be made, and I shall have all I wish, and be happy." "Astrologer," cried Ahmed, "astrologer, have you forgotten who I am, a cobbler, without any learning, that you want me to engage in a profession which requires so much skill and knowledge?" "I neither think nor care about your qualifications," said the enraged wife, "all I know is, that if you do not turn astrologer immediately I will be divorced from you tomorrow." The cobbler remonstrated, but in vain. The figure of the astrologer's wife, with her jewels and her slaves, had taken complete possession of Sit-Ra's imagination. All night it haunted her, she dreamt of nothing else, and on awaking declared she would leave the house if her husband did not comply with her wishes. What could poor Ahmed do? He was no astrologer, but he was dotingly fond of his wife, and he could not bear the idea of losing her. He promised to obey, and, having sold his little stock, bought an astrolabe, an astronomical almanac, and a table of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Furnished with these he went to the marketplace, crying, "I am an astrologer, I know the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and the 12 signs of the zodiac, I can calculate nativities, I can foretell everything that is to happen." No man was better known than Ahmed the Cobbler. A crowd soon gathered round him. "What? Friend Ahmed," said one, "have you worked till your head is turned? Are you tired of looking down at your last?" cried another, "that you are now looking up at the planets?" These and 1,000 other jokes assailed the ears of the poor cobbler, who, notwithstanding, continued to exclaim that he was an astrologer, having resolved on doing what he could to please his beautiful wife. It so happened that the king's jeweler was passing by. He was in great distress, having lost the richest ruby belonging to the crown. Every search had been made to recover this inestimable jewel, but to no purpose, and as the jeweler knew he could no longer conceal its loss from the king, he looked forward to death as inevitable. In this hopeless state, while wandering about the town, he reached the crowd around Ahmed and asked what was the matter. "Don't you know Ahmed the Cobbler?" said one of the bystanders, laughing. "He has been inspired, and is become an astrologer. A drowning man will catch at a broken reed." The jeweler no sooner heard the sound of the word astrologer, than he went up to Ahmed, told him what had happened, and said, "If you understand your art, you must be able to discover the king's ruby. Do so, and I will give you 200 pieces of gold, but if you do not succeed within 6 hours, I will use all my influence at court to have you put to death as an impostor." Poor Ahmed was thunderstruck. He stood long without being able to move or speak, reflecting on his misfortunes, and grieving, above all, that his wife, whom he so loved, had, by her envy and selfishness, brought him to such a fearful alternative. Full of these sad thoughts, he exclaimed aloud, "O woman, woman, thou art more baneful to the happiness of man than the poisonous dragon of the desert. The lost ruby had been secreted by the jeweler's wife, who, disquieted by those alarms which ever attend guilt, sent one of her female slaves to watch her husband. This slave, on seeing her master speak to the astrologer, drew near, and when she heard Ahmed, after some moments of apparent abstraction, compare a woman to a poisonous dragon, she was satisfied that he must know everything. She ran to her mistress, and, breathless with fear, cried, "You are discovered, my dear mistress, you are discovered by a vile astrologer. Before 6 hours are past the whole story will be known, and you will become infamous, if you are even so fortunate as to escape with life, unless you can find some way of prevailing on him to be merciful." She then related what she had seen and heard, and Ahmed's exclamation carried as complete conviction to the mind of the terrified mistress as it had done to that of her slave. The jeweler's wife, hastily throwing on her veil, went in search of the dreaded astrologer. When she found him, she threw herself at his feet, crying, "Spare my honor and my life, and I will confess everything." "What can you have to confess to me?" exclaimed Ahmed in amazement. "Oh, nothing, nothing with which you are not already acquainted. You know too well that I stole the ruby from the king's crown. I did so to punish my husband, who uses me most cruelly, and I thought by this means to obtain riches for myself, and to have him put to death. But you, most wonderful man, from whom nothing is hidden, have discovered and defeated my wicked plan. I beg only for mercy, and will do whatever you command me." An angel from heaven could not have brought more consolation to Ahmed than did the jeweler's wife. He assumed all the dignified solemnity that became his new character, and said, "Woman, I know all thou hast done, and it is fortunate for thee that thou hast come to confess thy sin and beg for mercy before it was too late. Return to thy house, put the ruby under the pillow of the couch on which thy husband sleeps, let it be laid on the side furthest from the door, and be satisfied thy guilt shall never be even suspected." The jeweler's wife returned home, and did as she was desired. In an hour Ahmed followed her, and told the jeweler he had made his calculations, and found by the aspect of the sun and moon, and by the configuration of the stars, that the ruby was at that moment lying under the pillow of his couch, on the side furthest from the door. The jeweler thought Ahmed must be crazy, but as a ray of hope is like a ray from heaven to the wretched, he ran to his couch, and there, to his joy and wonder, found the ruby in the very place described. He came back to Ahmed, embraced him, called him his dearest friend and the preserver of his life, and gave him the 200 pieces of gold, declaring that he was the first astrologer of the age. To be continued.